Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another session of Expert Insights Live. We've got Will Ide with us today. And before we start by getting Will to introduce himself, if anyone is live, if you all can just inform us that you all can hear us, that would be great. So at least we would have a confirmation that we are not alone, we're not talking into oblivion. So let's just wait a minute or so just to get some messages of confirmation that people can hear us. I can see that we are live on LinkedIn. My phone is notifying me that. But yeah. So if anyone can inform us that they can hear us and they can see us, that would be extremely helpful. Perfect. We've got a confirmation from William Bates. Looks great. I think he's talking about the book. And LinkedIn user, I can't see the name over here for some reason, neither can I over here. I can hear you is Ari Lamstein. Thank you, Ari, for confirming that. All right, so let's begin the session, Will. Will, can you do the honors of introducing yourself first?
Sure. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Will Aid. I've been a Pandas core maintainer since 2018, so I've done a lot in the open source space, and worked kind of starting as a developer on that project and transitioning into more of a maintenance, guidance, community-driven uh, reviewer in the organization, helping us to kind of think strategically about Pandas, how it should evolve, and how that project should look over the next 5 to 10 years. Alongside that, I'm also part of the Apache Arrow project, recently becoming a committer. So probably not going to talk a lot about the technical aspects of Apache Arrow in this, but just know that Pandas and Apache Arrow uh, kind of work hand in hand. So happy to be a part of both of those projects. And yeah, that's my open source background. My day job is a independent data consultant, so I help companies uh, really leverage the best of open source technology. Uh, there's a lot of talk about building composable data stacks and data systems. So I do that for a living. I'll come into clients and especially in the retail space, help them set up, their platform and make sure they have the right tools in place, the right methodologies, and that their people are trained and understand how to make the most out of open source technology.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Will. Uh, I see that a lot of people have started posting in the comments hashtag packed. I've got a couple of them on YouTube. I can't see any from LinkedIn. But yeah, so if you see at the bottom, there's a ticker where my finger is. So there are a couple of giveaways during the session. A couple of people would be picked randomly. Uh, Thanks, Neil. And there is another one here. So yes, please comment hashtag packed. We'll do a couple of raffles later during the session. And yeah, hopefully two of you will win a fresh ebook that Will has written. Uh, well, before we move on to the session, and if any one of you has any queries, please pop it in and we'll take that. So, Will, can you start by talking us through what the book is about? What's new, given this is the third edition of the book? So, what's new with this book?
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the second edition of the book was written 4 or 5 years ago. I forget the exact date. A
Yeah.
lot has changed, not just in pandas, but in open source technology over that time. So this third edition focuses a lot on, you know, one, what has changed in the past 4 to 5 years since the second edition that you could see today in pandas, and also how should you write pandas so that you're well oriented towards the next 5 to 10 years of growth in the ecosystem. One of the big selling points that I wanted to kind of get across with this edition was again that you'll write code that's going to scale, and that's not easy to do, and also not a perfect science. So, uh, but just kind of using that confluence of background and what I know again from the open source ecosystem and where I see that headed, and where a lot of other professionals are talking, I wanted to kind of impart that knowledge in a book of, hey, here's the way to write your code that's going to be fast, it's going to be scalable, and easy to maintain, easy to read. All those kind of aspects going into that. More tangibly, we talk about everything you need to know with pandas, right? So we do talk uh, towards the beginning of the book about very foundational aspects, uh, indexing, selection, types, all those kind of things. And throughout the book, I really wanted to structure it. It is a cookbook, so you can hop around. But I think if you
Mhm.
read it front to back as well. There's a lot of value in just seeing the chronology and the lineage. So we start kind of simple towards the beginning of the book. In the middle, we start talking about like all the IO methods. So I think when people start out with pandas, they probably start with like a CSV file or an Excel file and pull that into pandas. But there's way better formats like Part K that we discuss in the book and kind of show you why they're better. And there's a lot in the SQL space that's kind of been changing too. So that middle portion moves towards IO and more advanced applications of uh, pandas in terms of, hey, here's how you can use it to clean your data, reshape your data, and again, in a way that's performant and scalable. Towards the end of the book, we kind of talk about best practices. And the last chapter is really about the ecosystem, right? So Pandas is a fantastic tool in its own right. It doesn't do everything. And I think where it really shines is where it doesn't do things all that well. There's another tool that Pandas can interact with.
Mhm.
So I just want to impart again that knowledge of here's the ecosystem, here's the broader scope to the open source space. So as you as an end user pick up familiarity with pandas, I want you to know what it's great at, also what it's not that great at. And when you find that you run into a limitation, here's maybe some of the other projects that you will want to look at and explore.
Brilliant. Uh, Also, while we're waiting for the audience to ask their queries about pandas or about data in general, or the book, whatever they wish to inquire, uh, who would be the ideal target audience, or what would their prerequisites be like? Like, I'm pretty sure you're not going to teach Python programming with this book, so that would be one of the prerequisites. So, who would be the target audience for this?
Right. You do need a little bit of a Python background. So, and we say this in the preface to the book as well. As
Hmm.
long as you at least have some knowledge of Python containers, lists, sets, dictionaries, things like that, and you understand the syntax, then you can work with this book. Now, I did kind of cast a wide net. I didn't want to just focus on beginners, and I
Hmm.
didn't want to just focus on advanced users, right? I really believe that, and in kind of providing this book to people that have had both, 10 years experience with pandas and are brand new to it, I've gotten that feedback, and I've been happy to hear that hey, there was a lot that I learned out of this. I've had these bad habits, or I just didn't know that you could do this with pandas. I
Yeah.
really wanted to cater to both of those audiences. So experience level wasn't really a differentiator. Obviously, the roles that this book was really going to resonate with is your data scientists, your data analysts,
Hmm.
engineers, architects, any of those titles. Really, if you have a passion for data, I think Pandas has been a really critical tool to know for the past 15 years with no signs of slowing down. Uh, so if you use Python and you work with data, I think this book is for you.
I think you led me right into my next question. When you say that uh, it's not slowing down at all. Speaking of, there's Panda 3.x expected very soon. It's been in the news for quite a long time, and you would have all the information about that, given that you work in the core team. Uh, this book is mainly, it reads on the cover as well and on the book pages that it's for anyone working with Pandas 2.x and beyond. So with Pandas 3.x coming out, how much of the book would still remain valid, and would, or is there a risk of it getting irrelevant?
Yeah, pretty much everything's going to stay relevant. So we,
Brilliant.
again, really went through a lot of efforts between myself and the editors as well to
Hmm.
test all the code samples, make sure they still work on Pandas 3, um, and beyond. So with Pandas 3 coming up, the big feature that you're going to get in that library is
Hmm.
better string data type. Uh, so the third chapter in this cookbook talks all about data types in detail and talks about, when people say pandas is slow or has this issue, normally it comes back to the way that they've handled strings historically. Those problems should go away in pandas 3.0 going forward in combination with the Apache Arrow project. So again, ignoring some of the technical details, just trust that there's this whole ecosystem that uh, Pandas and Apache Arrow are kind of uh, working together on, and that's going to bring about a ton of great performance improvements with strings in 3.x. But in terms of how the library works, the syntax, things like that, should be largely familiar to users coming from 2.x going to the 3.x series of Pandas.
Great. Thanks for covering this right at the top. So at least the audience watching it live now or the people watching it later know that the book is not going to get irrelevant. Uh, okay, anyone and everyone watching us live, if you have any queries, feel free to ask them and pop them in the chat. In the meantime, I'll go ahead with my queries. I've got a list of them for Will. So, Will, what are the best practices for handling missing data, outliers, and incorrect data types in large data sets with pandas?
Yeah, this is where I'll plug chapter 3 in this book as kind of the most important thing to look at to answer that question.
Mhm.
Uh, Pandas has a lot of data types, and I think it's kind of unique to that tool. Again, this tool has been around for 15 years, so it does some things very well, and some others, you can kind of see a little age and a little rust to it. So data types uh, are interestingly one of the things that 10, 15 years ago people said, oh, the default way of handling types in pandas is amazing. It's such a good feature. It's lived long enough where people are like, oh, what are these default data types that I'm getting out of pandas? And a lot of that has to do with again just the whole open source ecosystem having changed. So I,
Mm.
I really stress to people throughout this book to ironically not use the default pandas type system and use data types that are more native in handling missing values, uh, and uh, you know, in doing so, you'll be able to write cleaner code and code that I think, when I look at where we're headed again in 5 to 10 years on the project, you're going to be ahead of the curve, and a lot of that backlog of development and features that need to be implemented, I think will be done so kind of with the same front end that I teach in this book. So yeah, just really chapter 3 data types. I can't stress enough how important that chapter is, and there's a reason why it was so early in the book, just to get that point across.
Thanks for that, Will. And Will, what techniques are available to improve performance on large data sets, especially for tasks like merging and joining?
Just being aware of what you're asking pandas to do is the number one thing.
Mhm.
And so I'll repeat data types. I can't. That's pretty much going to be an answer to every question here is using the right data types. Um, we actually have in chapter 10 of this book, we talk about best practices for writing code. So uh, data types is the number one issue I see with people not getting scalable code. Number two is using inefficient Python constructs, like maybe
Mm.
running a loop or using apply in a certain fashion. There's kind of these anti-patterns that seem natural to use when you're coming from Python, but they're really a habit that you have to be careful to unlearn when you start using pandas. Uh,
Mm.
so just writing code efficiently is really what's going to help you scale up to larger data sets. Um, the third thing I'd say is just using the right tools within pandas. So you know, if you're moving a lot of data across a SQL database or some kind of file system, you know, you should be using what I'll explain in this book as ADBC drivers instead of the traditional SQL Alchemy stuff that's been out there, or using Parquet instead of CSV. There's all these small choices that you can make, and they may seem really insignificant, but the wrong choice in tooling and technology and the line of code that you write can cause performance of 100 to 1,000 times if you're not careful. So
Mm.
throughout this book, I kind of highlight that and show you, and even provide benchmarks of, hey, if you did it this way, it will work, but look how much slower it is than if you did it this way, just to kind of drive that point home.
Thanks, Will. I see that there are a couple of queries that have come in. I'm sorry I missed this one earlier, John. So there is John Rivera Bernier on YouTube who inquires how much is the book. John, it depends from region to region. Uh, just to quickly show you, maybe that the book is, you can have a look at the pack website and it will change it to your country, wherever you're based. Uh, I'm based in the UK, so it's showing me in pounds. The ebook is 20.98 and the paperback is 37.99. And there's also subscription where you can read the book on. So yeah, it's completely up to you how you choose to read it. But yeah, do check it on the packed website because it changes based on the location. Uh, there is another query, Will, from Vatsal Raicha on LinkedIn with other data frame packages like polars, etc., that promise to boost the performance. Is there anything that Pandas is doing to do this without having to use polars? Going to do this, I think that's what it
Yeah,
means. Going to.
it's a great question, uh, which I kind of already answered when we were talking about what's coming in Pandas 3.x or 3.0. The biggest issue with Pandas historically has been the way that it handles strings. Um, and benchmarks are a funny game, so they can kind of be twisted and manipulated in any way to show this library is faster than that one. So without getting into kind of those kind of benchmark wars, I would say that using the pi arrow strings in Pandas 3.0 is going to be the biggest solve for any performance issues that Pandas has had in quite some time. It is significantly faster, significantly more memory efficient, and you'll get that for free just by upgrading to Pandas 3.0 and installing pi arrow. Um, we are actually cutting a 2.3 release soon of Pandas, so you can kind of opt into that behavior once you see 2.3 come out, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and experience that for yourself. But if you just wait naturally to the 3.0 release, that's going to be a huge boost to performance. Again, using pi arrow strings behind the
Mm.
scenes.
Thanks, Will. There's sort of a longish question, and I've just checked my phone on LinkedIn. It's by Ari Lamstein. I'm fairly new to Pandas. I've noticed that it has a dot plot function that makes it easy to plot your data frames, which is very helpful. But it looks like the dot plot uses matplotlib. But it looks like there are newer, more popular graphing libraries in Python, such as Seaborn, Altair, and Plotly. As a newbie, I find it's confusing. Are there any plans for Pandas to swap out matplotlib for one of those libraries for functions like dot plot?
Okay, so great question, and I will refer you to the entire chapter on visualization within the book, where we kind of show you Seaborn as well alongside Matplotlib, and we do talk about Plotly, and I'm not sure if it's pronounced PyGWalker or Pigwalker actually, but there's another tool that's in the ecosystem chapter. We didn't discuss Altair in this book, but to answer your question directly, you can already kind of do this today. So any plot call that you make in Pandas has a keyword argument of backend. So you could say backend equals Seaborn or backend equals Plotly, and that will allow you to still use the dot plot interface, but create a interactive Plotly graph instead of a matplotlib one. So depending on the medium that you're presenting in, that can make a huge difference. So check that out. It's also documented today, but we do show you how to do that in the book. Um, Now, as far as matplotlib going away, I really don't see that. And the reason for that is matplotlib is yeah, functionally ingrained into a lot of these libraries. Like even Seaborn actually uses matplotlib behind the scenes. So that's not going away anytime soon, but you can make decisions to improve the default styling, or again, use the backend keyword that I mentioned to generate, say, a plotly call, all using that same plot interface. So, great question.
Thanks, Will. Apparently, Ari was not aware of that feature. So thanks a lot for answering his question. And Vassal says thanks a lot for your response as well. So yeah, in case anyone else has any queries, please feel free to ask them. You don't always get access to someone like Will to answer your questions live for you. While we're waiting for others to ask their queries, I've got a ton more of them, Will, and I'm so sorry for that. But I'll keep taking more of your time. So, what are the most common challenges in handling time series data, such as time zone management and irregular time intervals, and how can they be managed in pandas?
Yeah, well, your question kind of answers some of those. So, time series handling, time zone management. I mean, that those are really tough. And I think what's even more difficult is Pandas solves a lot of those issues, but there's just, I think, in the data space, uh, people don't realize how difficult those issues are, right? So
Mm.
I've worked with plenty of other data analysts or engineers or whatever their role is on the IT side, people who just kind of carelessly toss around time zones, right? So in this book, we talk about why it's important to maintain time zone information, how you can kind of exchange between time zones if you need to, how to store it, different strategies for some databases allow you to store time zone information natively, others don't. Okay, if you're stuck in a database that doesn't store that information, here's what you should do, right? So just knowing about time zones and handling them, I think Pandas makes it really easy, and it's kind of eye-opening when you're coming from other tools, especially SQL databases or Excel files. If you're coming from that background, I think it's, again, really eye-opening what Pandas helps you to do. In terms of analyzing the data, there's a ton of awesome functionality to cleanse your data, create interval-based reporting, generate daily plots, sub-second plots, millisecond. Some people are working with time that's going to be on the scale of months to years, and other people may be working down in like nanoseconds or microseconds, maybe more in a scientific domain versus economic. Regardless of what your domain is, you can still use Pandas to kind of robustly work with time series data. And there's an entire chapter dedicated to that because, I think it's kind of lost now, but Pandas grew out of starting as a economic package that was really, providing these awesome features for time series handling. If it weren't for needing to solve this issue of time series handling, I don't know if Pandas would even exist today. So that's a key feature of the library that I wanted to make sure we highlighted and gave our own dedicated chapter to.
Brilliant. And so, what would you reckon would be the best practices for working with multi-index data frames? And how can users simplify complex aggregations then?
Yeah, so the multi-index is a interesting uh, piece of functionality in Pandas because I don't know any other tool that really offers that the same way that Pandas does. So I think when you're coming from other tools, if you haven't invested time into handling the multi-index, it can even see like kind of a burden, right? Someone mentioned polars before. Polars
Mm,
is really explicit, like we don't have a multi-index and we never will. Okay, that's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that decision. But if you can kind of interact with the multi-index, it's a really like fluid way to represent hierarchical relationships, both going row wise with your data as well as columnar. And I think sometimes we kind of forget that hierarchies exist way more than we give them credit for. If you've worked with financial teams that have Excel files, they're probably creating some kind of summary that's year, quarter, month, in the rows, and they probably have like this region and then sub-region uh, uh, in the rows. So the fact is, you could still natively ingest that type of data into Pandas and interact with it in a way that maintains that hierarchical relationship. It is kind of a weird syntax at first because there's this conflict between how Pandas works and how like Python syntax works. But in the selection chapter, chapter 2, we go in depth about, okay, if you're working with a multi-index, here's some approaches you could use to make selection easier. Either use tuples in a certain way, or there's this convenience index slice thing that is, I think, strangely named. But once you see it in action and once you use it, it can really help simplify interacting with a multi-index. As far as aggregations and things like that go, certainly that's tied to a multi-index, but can even exist outside of a multi-index as well. So we have an entire chapter about group by operations, about reshaping data. These are all really critical features that, again, if you're coming from other tools and you aren't familiar with what Pandas offers, I think you'll be amazed in terms of how you can aggregate data, disaggregate data, move it from rows to columns. I mean, it's just an amazing toolkit for manipulating data.
perfect. I think, Will, I'll give you a chance to have a sip of water. And because you've been answering questions back to back, let us do our first raffle. Uh, we'll do a first raffle for everyone. I think we've got quite a few people. Oh, yeah, I'll just share my screen. so we can do it live and show the raffle to everyone. Can you see my screen, Will?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got about 9 entries so far, as we can see here. Let's just select draw and let it pick a random winner. Let's see who is our first winner in the raffle. Rohit H on YouTube. Congratulations, Rohit. You can just get in touch with me on LinkedIn and I'll ensure that you get your ebook. Congratulations. And anyone else who hasn't won the raffle yet, please don't be disheartened. You can just enter hashtag packed as it says at the bottom, just as it says over here on the ticker. Just comment hashtag packed, and you could also have a chance to win the raffle. There is one more to go. We'll do that closer to the end. Uh, but now, I think there is quite a nice question over here from someone on LinkedIn. Is it possible for someone to contribute code to pandas? How do people normally go about making their first contribution?
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, it is a open source project, right? So we accept contributions from anyone around the world at any time. Uh, Pandas itself is not backed by any major corporation. We are not part of the NUM-focused nonprofit, so we aren't necessarily funded for any certain agenda or anything. It really is just a community of volunteers that come in and want to learn, enjoy working with each other, and use pandas in their day jobs typically. If you want to go about making your first contribution, which is a great question, there's quite a few ways that you can approach that depending on what your experience is. Now, you will need some experience with development tools like Git. Uh, we are on GitHub, so you want to be familiar with GitHub, and you probably want a good IDE, whatever else you need for development. There is a entire part of the documentation dedicated to contributing to pandas. So you can Google that and read how to set up your development environment. Um, Once the technical stuff is out of the way, then the question becomes like, okay, what is my contribution actually going to look like? And you can look on the Pandas GitHub. We typically mark uh, things that we think are good for beginners. We have a label that will say good first issue. So you can always look for the good first issue label. So we have a Slack channel with a newcomers channel where people will post like, hey, if anyone's new and wants to try something out, I think this is a good issue to kind of tackle. The last thing I'd say, and the way that I kind of got into it was, I used pandas and I had a certain need. So I came from working with the Excel interface a lot, and I saw, okay, I know Excel, I kind of know pandas, like there's an Excel label in there. Let me look at everything labeled Excel and just try and find issues that I think, I've been affected by personally, because I think that is really helpful. If there's some problem you're trying to solve, it's usually a little bit easier um, to go in it and find something to work on. But that said, even if you don't know the problem that you're trying to solve, look for the good first issue label, check out our Slack channel, and yeah, just stay active and engaged with the community. We kind of, uh, post stuff all the time.
Nice. So I think you covered a bit of this earlier. So Mr. J on LinkedIn inquires, hello, please. What are the limitations of pandas?
Yeah, that is a kind of an open question, but Pandas is really focused on uh, working with like tabular data, two-dimensional data. So if you're working with n-dimensional data sets, you probably still need to stick with NumPy. Um, if you're doing some kind of machine learning AI application, machine learning, you're probably looking at scikit-learn AI, look at tools like PyTorch or any of the other libraries out there in that space. So Pandas really is just carved out a niche of two-dimensional tabular data sets. Think of working a lot with SQL databases or Excel files or anything of that nature. That's where Pandas is going to operate as well. Historically, we've struggled with scaling out to more than one machine. We've always been like a single user kind of use case, and if you want to work in a distributed computing environment or something else of that nature, you'd have to use another tool. Uh, that limitation still exists today, but in the next 5 to 10 years, as we become more integrated with the Apache Arrow project, I think our scalability is going to improve. I don't know what that exactly is going to look like, but technically, there's a lot that we still have opportunity-wise to just make Pandas scale more naturally for our end users.
Tyler on LinkedIn inquires, you mentioned earlier that this book will still work with version 3, which is awesome. On that note, do you highlight potential differences with setting options between now and then? And he adds, example, pd.options.mode.copy on write equals to
Definitely.
true.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually did not go directly into options like that just because our options interface is not stable.
Hmm.
So that is always kind of a development feature. Uh, and it's tough to write a book about a development feature. But um, I did I didn't talk a lot about copy on write because the book just kind of assumes you're using copy on write, and I think the non-copy on write methodology is kind of uh, dying off. But going back to the example of strings, I was careful to say, like, if you're running this on 2.2 and aren't using uh, high arrow, note that when you go to 3.0, you're going to see a lot more improvement. So really the only options that I kind of touched around was around string handling, and I didn't talk specifically about the option as a development feature, but mentioned like, hey, here's the versions and kind of how that makes a difference.
Okay. I think Jeffrey Crosby on LinkedIn is inquiring what's the Slack channel name. Uh, isn't the Slack channel just for contributors or is it open to everyone?
It's open to everybody. I'll have to get back to you on that. I think if you go to the GitHub page for
Is
Pandas, it should have a
is it
link to the Slack channel.
pandas dash dev? That's the
It's
one.
Yeah, it's probably pandas-dev/pandas or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's on the GitHub. If you don't see it there, feel free to post a create an issue on the GitHub. But
Yeah.
it's open to anybody. It's not just for maintainers.
Okay. I think Jeffrey, it's pandas dash dev. If you just type pandas dash dev plus Slack on Google, you will get the link to that. Uh, I think this is Ari again. Ari, for some reason, he's appearing as LinkedIn user. Ari is inquiring, can you tell us a bit more what PyIRO, what PyIRO and how it relates to pandas? Are you
Yeah.
allowed to speak about that?
Yeah, I can for sure. And as I mentioned, I'm giving this interview today mostly, drawing on my background as a Pandas core maintainer, but I am a committer to the Apache Arrow project as well. So I know a decent amount about that project and kind of where it's headed. Um, this can get really technical, so I don't want to go super deep on this, but to keep it at a very high level, PyArrow is a part of the Apache Arrow project. Wes McKinney, who started Pandas, was one of the co-founders of Apache Arrow as well. So he has a really famous blog post, which I mentioned in the book as well, called "10 Things I Hate About Pandas," and it's a little dated now, but it kind of gives his original motivation of, you know, we need to start this new project to solve this issue because Pandas, while great, it's just one libraries under a larger ecosystem. Apache Arrow wanted to solve uh, data sharing for any kind of library. Like back then, people were fighting between is Pandas better than R versus Julia. Now everyone's fighting between Pandas versus Polars, and it's like, okay, like, there's always going to be tool and library kind of evangelists that claim this one's better than that. But at the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is solve the same analytical problems, and we need to be able to exchange data between pandas in a visualization library or SQL database or whatever other tool there is, another data frame library. Apache Arrow is kind of a specification for defining, like, here's how the data should be laid out. Here's the specifications you need to follow. Here's how you exchange data. If you do this, you could exchange data between processes, tools, libraries, languages. It really doesn't matter. So PyArrow is just something that Pandas is going to continue to build on top of, and it just makes it so that Pandas is kind of more open to this larger ecosystem of tools. And since Polars came up, I mean, one of the great things about Polars is that it's kind of Apache Arrow native from the start. We're we have a longer history where we aren't quite there, but we're moving in that same direction, so that if all these tools are kind of working with Apache Arrow behind the scenes, they'll be able to exchange data a lot more efficiently. And you as an end user won't necessarily need to change much, but you'll just see this like rapid growth of open source tools that kind of work with one another.
Yeah, Russell says something similar that would love that if distributed computing becomes possible with pandas. So looking forward to the PyArrow integration.
Yeah, yeah, great. And again, I don't want to make any promises like today, like, oh, this is coming in the next year, because there's still real work to be done on that front. But PyArrow just makes us more scalable, and they solve that issue of here's how you can work with data in a distributed fashion or a streaming fashion, or data that exceeds the amount of RAM on your computer. So the more that we work with them, we get closer and closer each year to kind of achieving that seamless computing ability.
Tyler is thanking you for the example that you gave early on while you were talking about uh, the options of copy mode and all of that. So that's a great example. Thank you. Really excited to learn more about those differences and totally get the option naming conventions being tweaked across the versions.
Cool.
Paddy has a query. What's your workflow for exploratory data analysis with pandas? When do you look at a data frame in Jupyter versus a subset in Excel versus plotting?
There's no great answer to that. I think um, one thing that I kind of stress all the time too, that I feel gets lost a lot when we talk about technology, is programming is still a very personal kind of experience, right? So depending on how good you are at Excel and pandas and this plotting library, you may find that you're more comfortable starting in Excel up until this point, where someone else who knows less about Excel doesn't want to even go that far in Excel.
Hmm.
So there's no right or wrong answer to exploratory data analysis. Now, in this book, I show you how to kind of do exploratory data analysis. When you're reading certain things, like how can you peek at certain columns, understand the distribution. In the ecosystem chapter, we talk about why data profiling, which is a really popular third-party library that sits on top of pandas and gives you, auto-generated distribution plots, correlation plots, things like that. But ultimately, there's not really one right way to do it. It comes down to your data and your familiarity with tools. But throughout this, I show you like kind of start to finish. If you want to do everything in pandas, great. Here's the way to do it. Here's loading data. Here's cleansing it. Here's analyzing it, visualizing it. I mean, you get all of that throughout this book.
Brilliant. Mr. Jay inquires, what is the GitHub link? Jay, if you're talking about the GitHub for pandas, it's github.com/pandas
Dash
hyphen dev.
dev slash
Yeah.
pandas.
Yeah. So if you just type that in, or simply just type GitHub plus pandas on Google, and yeah, that'll be the first thing that'll pop up. In case you're talking about the GitHub link for the book to check out the repository, then you can just type Pandas Cookbook third edition plus GitHub. That will be the first thing that will pop up on Google. And yeah, that will be the book. Uh, so I had another query for you, Will, because I think I've exhausted all the reader queries, the audience queries. Uh, can you provide examples of full workflows from data ingestion and cleaning to analysis and export for maintaining clean and reproducible code? Sorry.
Yeah. And again, this is another one where it kind of depends on, and I think of this from like an enterprise setting, right? Like as a consultant, I'll come into different organizations and
Mm,
help them view their data pipeline. Just real quick about Pandas, what I like about it is it can fit almost anywhere in that data pipeline, right? So as you mentioned, you're going to have steps for extracting data, for cleansing, transforming, for storing. You can use Pandas at every single point along the way of that.
mhm,
But as we think again about this whole concept of an composable open source data system in the future. There might be some things that you really like pandas for, and tools like, I'll say, Great Expectations, that's covered in the ecosystem chapter as well, that can be helpful to set up automated tests and validate that you're getting um, data coming in the way that you want to. So that's a tool to consider. Another tool is PyTest, right? When you're thinking about application logic, if you're doing a lot of heavy transformations to your data and creating custom functions and things like that, PyTest is probably great to make sure that the functions that you're implementing work the way that you think they do.
Hmm.
So I always stress, and again, when I come to a client, I may not use all of those tools. It depends what they have in place. But that's kind of the beauty of an open source ecosystem, is like if you're starting from scratch, yeah, great. Use PyTest for your application logic. Use a tool like Great Expectations to validate, the data quality coming in. And you could use a tool like Airflow for scheduling, and use pandas inside of Airflow or in any kind of cloud service, and set up the alerting that you need using that as well. So that is a very open-ended ecosystem to solve that problem.
Great. I think we'll just take this last query before doing our last raffle. In case anyone has more queries, please pop it in. The last call for more queries if you have any. Julius Williams on YouTube inquires, please, is there any specific language that one should know before joining the Pandas community? I think he means in case of contribution, if
Yeah.
I'm not wrong.
Well, the library is written in Python, so that's helpful. But even if you don't know Python, I still encourage people. You can find ways to make non-code contributions, even if it's not on GitHub. We always look for, especially because we're volunteer driven and we're not the greatest at everything. There's gaps in our organization that we can always use help on, whether it's working with social media and kind of promoting a lot of the things that Pandas is doing. It could be writing documentation, editing, copywriting. I mean, we have, there's technical content that's going to require Python to use, and then there's this whole open-ended spectrum of training, promotion, editing. If you can bring tools in any of those areas, I would encourage you to get involved in the Slack channel, and maybe even ask questions like, hey, I was thinking about creating a training video. Is there a way to kind of put that into the project? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but it never hurts to ask that question.
Really. And also, there is a Discord community for the book. So, in case you end up buying the book and if you have further queries, and while you're reading through the book and going through your learning journey, feel free to pop in your queries on that Discord server. And yeah, we'll help you get answers for that during your learning journey. So, don't worry, you're not alone while reading the book. So, let us do the last raffle. Just let me know when you can see my screen well.
I see it.
Brilliant. Rohit, you were the winner of the first raffle. In case you see this, please get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find. Tushar Gupta on LinkedIn. Just get in touch with me. And let's do the last raffle now. Let's see who wins it. Elementos LHP on YouTube. Today, both the winners are from YouTube. So, congratulations, Elementos. Please get in touch with me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I'll arrange a copy for the both of you. Congratulations to Elementos and to Rohit, both of you. And thanks again, everyone, for attending, and Bill, for your time. Do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to share with us?
I'd like to say thank you to everyone who came. Thank you for the great questions. They were awesome. You know, Pandas has always been about the community, again, being open source. So if you're part of that community already or thinking about it, hopefully, if you buy this cookbook, I'd love to hear all your feedback. Good and bad. The whole point of this is to just help people out there, get everyone excited about what Pandas is and what it can be, and how it can help you in your analytical tasks. So thanks again for joining, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Bye now.